You can't be serious, I said. The words came out sharper than I intended, cutting through the silence of my own office like a blade through canvas. But Patrick just stood there, arms crossed, that infuriating smirk playing at the corners of his mouth like he'd just won something valuable. I'm serious, he replied. Dead serious, Alexis. My name is Alexis Lane. I'm 39 years old. I live in a renovated boathouse overlooking the Columbia River in Portland, Oregon. And until approximately 15 minutes ago, I was the executive vice president of operations at Harborstone Freight, the shipping company our grandfather built from a single tugboat and a dream back in 1967. Patrick shifted his weight, straightening the cuffs of his absurdly expensive suit. The kind that screamed, I paid someone to tell me I look important. His hair was gelled back in that tech bro style that didn't belong anywhere near actual docks or cargo containers. He looked like he was cosplaying success. The board agrees with me, he said, glancing toward the door where his assistant waited, some eager kid in his early 20s who probably thought corporate ruthlessness was admirable. It's time for new leadership. Fresh vision. I laughed once. A sharp, humorless sound. The board you stacked 3 months ago with your Stanford buddies? He didn't answer. That's when I knew this wasn't a discussion. It was an execution, and he'd already written the eulogy. For 14 years I'd been the backbone of Harborstone. While Patrick was partying his way through business school and backpacking across Southeast Asia finding himself, I was negotiating union contracts, managing port relationships, and handling the kind of operational nightmares that never made it into quarterly reports. I fixed things before they broke. I kept ships moving when storms hit. I knew every dock supervisor by name, every crane operator's birthday, every customs officer's coffee preference. Patrick knew spreadsheets and buzzwords. The company needs agility, he continued, hands now in his pockets like this was casual conversation. We're bringing in someone with global experience. Someone who understands modern logistics. You're replacing me with Damien Cross, I said flatly. He blinked. How did you? Because I know how you think, Patrick. Damien's destroyed 2 regional carriers and walked away with golden parachutes both times. He's a corporate vampire. That's your opinion. I stood slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. My hands weren't shaking. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. You have no idea what you're doing. Don't make this personal. Personal? Kept my voice level, calm. You're dismantling everything our family built because you want to prove you're more than grandfather's spare heir. This isn't strategy. It's insecurity. His jaw tightened. Security will escort you out. I reached for the only item on my desk I cared about. A faded photograph in a wooden frame. Our grandfather stood on the original dock, one weathered hand resting on a rusted bollard, his face lined with exhaustion and pride. The water behind him was gray and restless, just like it always was in November. Patrick watched me slide it into my bag. That's it? No fight. I walked past him, pausing at the threshold. The lease agreements for Terminals 9 and 11 expire in 94 days, I said quietly. Might want to check who owns that land. His expression shifted. Confusion, then a flicker of something that might have been concern. But I was already gone. The drive home took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets and gray industrial corridors. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, my knuckles pale against the black leather. The photograph sat in the passenger seat, face up, grandfather's eyes staring at nothing. When I bought that land 6 years ago, it wasn't revenge. It was protection. Our uncle had sold it to a development group during a cash crunch, and I'd watched them sit on it, waiting for property values to climb. So I'd created a shell company, made a quiet offer and closed the deal without ever mentioning it to anyone at Harborstone. The lease agreements I'd negotiated had been generous. Below market rate, long terms, automatic renewals. But those renewals required my signature. Patrick had no idea. My phone buzzed against the center console. A text from Nora, one of our longest-serving dispatch managers. Heard what happened? This is garbage. You okay? I stared at the message for a long moment, rain drumming against the windshield. Then I typed back, I will be. At home, I made coffee and stood at the window overlooking the water. A barge crawled past, low and heavy, its running lights barely visible through the mist. Somewhere out there, the machinery of commerce kept grinding forward, indifferent to boardroom coups and family betrayals. My father called that evening. His voice was rough, apologetic. I didn't vote for this. But you didn't stop it, I said. Silence stretched between us, heavy and familiar. He'd stepped down as CEO 5 years ago, handing the reins to Patrick with some misguided belief that blood and legacy were enough to guarantee competence. I'm sorry, Alexis. Sorry doesn't pay my mortgage, Dad. But I appreciate the sentiment. What are you going to do? I took a sip of coffee, watching the sky darken over the river. I'm going to let Patrick learn what happens when you fire the person holding up the ceiling. He sighed. Don't burn it down. I'm not burning anything, I said. I'm just stepping back and letting gravity do its work. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. Anger, betrayal, exhaustion. But beneath it all, something colder and sharper. Clarity. Patrick thought he'd taken my power by taking my title. But power isn't a nameplate or a corner office. It's leverage. And I still had plenty of that. The first cracks appeared within 2 weeks. Nora sent me a message. New guys cutting safety inspections. Dock crews are pissed. Then 3 days later, maintenance budget slashed. 2 forklifts down. We're borrowing equipment from Terminal 7. I didn't respond to any of it. Just watched from a distance as the machine I'd built started rattling without proper maintenance. Damien Cross was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive suits, flashy presentations, zero understanding of how things actually worked on the ground. He saw shipping as a numbers game, not a people business. He thought loyalty was a line item you could cut to improve margins. He was going to destroy Harborstone and Patrick was going to let him. My lawyer called on a Thursday morning. Alexis, we need to talk about the lease renewals. I'd been expecting this. What's the situation? Harborstone's legal team reached out. They want to extend under the existing terms. She paused. They seemed surprised when I told them the decision was yours. I bet they were. What did you tell them? That you'd consider their offer and respond in due course. She hesitated. They're going to panic when they realize the rates are increasing. Market value, I said. Not a penny less. That's a 28% jump, Alexis. I know. Send them the proposal. You're sure about this? I stared out at the water, watching a container ship ease through the channel. Absolutely. When the proposal arrived at Harborstone 3 days later, my phone exploded. Texts from former colleagues. Emails from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Everyone suddenly very concerned about my well-being and very curious about my intentions. Patrick didn't call. But his lawyer did. Mississippi Lane, this is Gordon Priest with Harborstone Freight. I'm calling regarding your recent lease proposal for Terminals 9 and 11. I know why you're calling, Mr. Priest. The rate increase you're proposing is market rate, I interrupted. Actually, it's slightly below market rate. I had it appraised by 3 independent firms. I'm happy to share their reports. He cleared his throat. This puts the company in a difficult position. That's unfortunate. We'd like to negotiate. Then make an offer. The silence that followed was delicious. Mississippi Lane, perhaps we could meet in person to discuss this? I don't think that's necessary, I said. You have my terms. Accept them or find alternative facilities. I'm sure there are other docks in Portland. There was a pause. We both knew there weren't. Not for Harborstone's volume. Not without massive operational disruptions. I'll relay this to Mr. Sloan, he said stiffly. You do that. That evening, I met with Elena Hoffman, CEO of Pacific Gateway Shipping. We'd crossed paths at industry conferences over the years, maintained a cordial professional relationship built on mutual respect and the occasional frank conversation about the challenges of being women in a male-dominated field. We sat in a quiet corner of a waterfront restaurant, the kind of place where the fish was fresh and the waitstaff knew when to disappear. I heard about what happened, Elena said, swirling her wine. Patrick's making waves in all the wrong ways. He's making mistakes, I corrected. Big ones. She smiled. And you're in a position to capitalize on those mistakes. I might be. Elena leaned forward, her expression sharpening. Pacific Gateway has been looking to expand our West Coast operations. Harborstone's infrastructure is impressive, but their management is rapidly becoming a liability. I set down my glass. What are you proposing? A partnership. You own the terminals. We need reliable, well-managed facilities. We lease from you at fair market rates, bring in our operational expertise, and offer positions to Harborstone's displaced workers. She paused. You'd come on as regional director of operations. Quietly at first, but with full authority. And Harborstone? We let them collapse under their own incompetence. Then we buy the assets at liquidation prices. I sat back processing. It was ruthless. It was also smart. What about the staff? The people who've been there for decades? We keep them, Elena said firmly. I've seen your work, Alexis. The loyalty you've built. That's worth more than any equipment or contract. We'd be fools not to preserve it. I thought about Nora, about the crane operators and longshoremen who'd trusted me for years. About grandfather's photograph sitting on my mantle at home. I need to think about it. Elena nodded. Take your time. But not too much time. Opportunities like this don't wait. We finished dinner talking about industry trends and shared frustrations. But my mind was already mapping out the possibilities, calculating risks and benefits, seeing the shape of what could come next. Patrick had tried to erase me from the company. But he'd forgotten that erasure works both ways. He could take my title, but he couldn't take my network, my knowledge, or my leverage. And now I was about to show him the difference. The next morning I started making calls. Nora first. How bad is it? Her sigh told me everything. We had a crane failure yesterday. Damien refused to authorize repairs. Said we'd work around it. She paused. 3 crews called in sick today. It's not really sick. It's protest. I know. People are asking about you. Tell them to hang on a little longer. Next I called Raymond Torres, our head of safety compliance. He'd been with Harborstone since before Patrick was born, a gruff former Navy engineer who took safety violations personally. They're cutting corners everywhere, he told me bluntly. Inspection cycles doubled. Training programs cancelled. I've filed 9 incident reports in 2 weeks. 9. And Damien's response was to suggest I was being overly cautious. Document everything, Raymond. Timestamps, photos, witness statements. Everything. You thinking legal action? I'm thinking survival. Yours and everyone else's. He was quiet for a moment. Whatever you're planning, I'm with you. One by one, I reached out to the people who'd kept Harborstone running while Patrick played CO. The mechanics, the shift supervisors, the logistics coordinators. I didn't make promises. Just let them know I was working on something, that their loyalty hadn't been forgotten. By the end of the week, my phone was ringing constantly. People were scared. Morale was in free fall. Damien's cost-cutting had gone from aggressive to dangerous, and Patrick was either oblivious or didn't care. Then came the incident that changed everything. Raymond called me at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. There's been an accident. My stomach dropped. How bad? Forklift collision. 1 operator injured, another shaken up. It was preventable, Alexis. The equipment hadn't been serviced in 6 weeks. Does anyone? He'll be okay. Broken arm, some bruising. But it could have been worse. Much worse. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it. This is on Damien. He's already trying to spin it as operator error. I've got the maintenance logs. He's lying. Send me everything. The files arrived 20 minutes later. Maintenance requests denied. Safety inspections postponed. Equipment logs showing clear mechanical failures that should have triggered immediate shutdowns. It was exactly what I needed. And it made me sick. I called Elena the next morning. I'm in. She didn't sound surprised. Good. I'll have our legal team draw up the framework. We move fast on this. One condition, I said. The injured worker, Antonio Reyes. Whatever medical expenses he has, Pacific Gateway covers them. Fully. Done. And his job is guaranteed. No matter what happens. Absolutely. I spent that afternoon at the hospital, sitting with Antonio's wife while he was in surgery. She was terrified, exhausted, trying to hold it together for their 2 kids who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. This shouldn't have happened, I told her quietly. I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. By the time Patrick called an emergency board meeting, the walls were already closing in. He just didn't know it yet. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Monday. I arrived at 8:45, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same calm expression I'd cultivated through years of high-stakes negotiations. The conference room hadn't changed. Same view of the river, same polished table, same uncomfortable chairs designed to make meetings feel urgent. Patrick sat at the head, Damien to his right, looking smug and unbothered. The board members filed in, 6 faces ranging from concerned to confused. Dad was there too, sitting near the back, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Patrick frowned when he saw me. This is a closed meeting, Alexis. Not anymore. I set my portfolio on the table. Everyone here needs to see what's been happening. You don't have authority to. Actually, I do. I opened the portfolio, distributing packets to each board member. As the owner of the land beneath Terminals 9 and 11, and the party responsible for lease renewals, I have a vested interest in how this company operates. Especially when that operation endangers lives. Murmurs rippled through the room. Papers shuffled. Page 3, I continued, details the maintenance deficiencies that led to last week's accident. 17 documented safety violations in 3 weeks. Equipment failures, inspection postponements, training cancellations. All authorized by your new operations director. Damien leaned forward. That's a gross mischaracterization. Page 7, I said, cutting him off, includes testimony from 5 separate crew members describing the conditions they're working under. Page 9 has the hospital report for Antonio Reyes, who's currently recovering from injuries sustained due to faulty equipment your team refused to repair. Patrick's face had gone pale. Alexis, this is... Page 12, I said, my voice steady, shows the permits filed by a company called Coastal Transit Solutions. A shell corporation registered under Patrick's name. The business plan outlines a competing freight operation using routes, clients, and operational procedures identical to Harborstone's. Dead silence. One of the board members, an older woman named Catherine Wells who'd known our grandfather, looked up sharply. Is this true? Patrick stood. This is completely out of context. There's a pitch deck, I continued, pulling out my laptop and connecting it to the room's display. Sent to venture capital firms 3 weeks ago. It describes Harborstone as bloated and outdated, ripe for disruption. And it proposes stripping our operational assets, repackaging them and selling them back to investors as innovation. The screen filled with slides. Patrick's name on every page. His signature on the incorporation documents. You're trying to gut the company, Dad said quietly. His voice carried more weight than any shout could have. You're destroying what your grandfather built so you can rebuild it with your name on top. Patrick's mouth opened and closed. It's just preliminary. It's theft, Catherine said flatly. Intellectual property theft, strategic sabotage, and gross negligence resulting in worker injury. Damien pushed back from the table. I was brought in to streamline operations. You were brought in to provide cover, I said, looking directly at him. While Patrick set up his competing venture, you created chaos. Cut costs, undermined safety, drove away experienced staff. All to make Harborstone look incompetent so investors would believe Patrick's pitch. Damien said nothing. I turned back to the board. I'm offering an alternative. Pacific Gateway Shipping has submitted a formal proposal to acquire Harborstone's operational assets. They'll lease the terminals from me at sustainable rates, retain all current staff and restore safety standards immediately. The transition can be seamless if we act now. What about existing contracts? Someone asked. Honored in full. Pacific Gateway has the infrastructure to absorb our operations without disruption. And Patrick? I looked at my brother. His face was a mask of shock and anger and something that might have been shame. That's up to the board, I said. The vote took 11 minutes. Patrick was removed as CEO, effective immediately. Damien's contract was terminated. The board approved negotiations with Pacific Gateway. And Catherine Wells was appointed interim CEO until the transition was complete. Patrick stood, pale and shaking. You planned this? No, I said quietly. You did. I just stopped pretending I couldn't see it. He walked out without another word. Damien followed, neither of them looking back. Dad stayed behind after everyone else filtered out. We sat in silence for a while, the morning light streaming through the windows, painting everything gold. I should have seen it sooner, he said. You did see it. You just hoped it wasn't true. He nodded slowly. You'll take care of the people? That's the only thing that matters. He stood, placing a hand briefly on my shoulder. Your grandfather would be proud. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room watching the river through the glass. A cargo ship was making its way upstream, slow and steady, its wake spreading behind it in perfect V-shaped ripples. I thought about all the years I'd spent proving myself, earning trust, building systems that worked not because they were flashy but because they were sound. All the early mornings and late nights, the solved crises and prevented disasters. Patrick had seen all of that as weakness. Something old-fashioned and disposable. But the people who actually did the work knew better. My phone buzzed. A text from Nora. Heard the news. Thank God. When are you coming back? I smiled. The transition took 3 months. Pacific Gateway's acquisition team was efficient and professional. They honored every promise Elena had made. Staff retention was prioritized. Safety protocols were reinstated immediately. Equipment was repaired and updated. The chaos of Patrick's tenure was replaced by steady, competent management. I worked behind the scenes at first, helping coordinate the handover, introducing key personnel, smoothing over relationships that had been strained by recent events. Then gradually I stepped back into a more visible role. Regional Director of Operations. No corner office this time. Just a desk near the dispatch center where I could see and hear everything happening in real time. Antonio returned to work in January, his arm healed, his confidence restored. We'd set up a safety committee with rotating staff representation, and he'd volunteered immediately. Turned out getting hurt because someone cut corners made you pretty passionate about prevention. Nora became my right hand officially this time. She knew the rhythms of the operation better than anyone, and the crews trusted her completely. Raymond implemented a new training program, mandatory and comprehensive. No exceptions, no shortcuts. Slowly the culture I'd built came back. Not because I demanded it, but because people remembered what it felt like to work somewhere that valued their safety and expertise. Patrick's Coastal Transit Solutions never launched. Once word got out about what he'd tried to do, investors vanished. The permits were withdrawn. The shell company dissolved quietly, a footnote in business filings nobody would ever read. I heard he'd moved to San Francisco, taking some consulting position with a tech startup. I didn't follow up. Didn't need to. Dad and I had dinner once a month now. We didn't talk about Patrick much. Mostly discussed the business, industry trends, family news. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had been. We were rebuilding in our own way. 1 year and 2 months after that board meeting, I stood at the edge of Terminal 9, watching the sun set over the river. The sky was streaked with orange and purple, the water reflecting it all back in shimmering ripples. A container ship was being loaded, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal mixing with the calls of dockworkers and the low rumble of machinery. It was a sound I'd heard 10,000 times and it never got old. Elena walked up beside me, hands in her pockets. You've done remarkable work here. We've done remarkable work, I corrected. She smiled. Fair enough. The board's impressed. They want to expand further up the coast. Asked if you'd be interested in overseeing it. I considered it. More responsibility, more territory, more chances to build something lasting. Let me think about it, I said. Take your time. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the workers move with practiced efficiency. Every person out there knew their job, trusted their equipment, felt valued. That was the real victory. Not the boardroom drama or the property leverage or even the satisfaction of watching Patrick's plans crumble. It was this. People doing good work safely, going home to their families at the end of their shifts, knowing they mattered. Grandfather's photograph sat on my desk back in the office, watching over everything. I'd added a second photo beside it recently. A shot of the Terminal 9 crew after we'd completed our first accident-free quarter under Pacific Gateway. 53 faces, all smiling, all proud. That was my empire. Not steel and concrete and shipping routes, though those mattered too. It was trust, competence, and the knowledge that doing things right was always worth it, even when nobody was watching. Patrick had tried to take all of that from me. Thought he could erase years of work with a single boardroom coup. But some things can't be erased. They're too deep, too foundational. He'd learned that the hard way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the river in shades of gold, I turned and headed back to the office. There was always more work to do. Ships to schedule, crews to coordinate, problems to solve. And for the first time in a long time I was exactly where I wanted to be. Not because I'd fought to get here, but because I'd never really left. The tide had tried to pull me out, but I'd kept my feet planted, waiting for it to turn. And when it did, I was still standing. Ready to build something better than what came before. The months that followed brought their own rhythms and challenges. Pacific Gateway wanted to implement new tracking systems across all terminals, which meant training sessions and adjustment periods and the inevitable resistance that comes with any change. But I'd learned how to navigate that. You didn't force new systems on experienced workers. You showed them why it mattered, how it made their jobs easier, how it kept them safer. You listened to their concerns and adjusted accordingly. By spring, the new systems were running smoothly. Efficiency was up 18%. Incident reports were down to nearly zero. Employee retention was the highest it had been in 5 years. The industry noticed. We started getting inquiries from other companies asking about our protocols, our training programs, our management philosophy. Elena fielded most of those, always careful to give credit where it was due. I kept my head down and focused on the work. That's what I'd always done best. But there were moments, small ones, when I let myself feel satisfied. Like the morning Raymond stopped by my desk with coffee and told me his daughter had decided to study maritime engineering because she'd grown up hearing him talk about how much he loved his job. Or when Nora's son graduated high school and told her he wanted to work at the dock someday because it seemed like a place where people took care of each other. Or when Antonio organized a fundraiser for another worker's family after their house flooded, and every single person from 3 shifts showed up to help. Those were the things Patrick had never understood. The invisible architecture of loyalty and respect that held everything together. You couldn't build that with motivational speeches or corporate restructuring. You built it one decision at a time, one conversation at a time, by showing up consistently and treating people like they mattered. Because they did. I ran into Patrick once about 18 months after everything fell apart. It was at a maritime industry conference in Seattle. I was there representing Pacific Gateway, speaking on a panel about sustainable port operations. He was in the audience, sitting near the back, trying to be inconspicuous. After my panel, I found him in the lobby. He looked older, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "Alexis," he said, caught off guard. "Hey." Awkward silence stretched between us. "You did well up there," he said finally. "The presentation. It was good. Thank you." He shifted, uncomfortable. "I heard things are going well. At the terminals." "They are." More silence. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what happened. How it happened." I studied him, trying to determine if he meant it. His eyes were sincere, at least. Tired but sincere. "I appreciate that," I said. "I was in over my head. Trying to prove something. I don't know." He rubbed his face. "I made a lot of mistakes." "You did." He nodded. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you landed on your feet." "I didn't land on my feet, Patrick. I was never falling. You just thought I was." He blinked. "I built something real," I continued, keeping my voice level. "It had roots. You tried to knock it over, but you can't knock over something that's properly anchored. You just end up hurting yourself." His jaw tightened. "I know that now." "Good." We stood there for another moment, the conference noise swirling around us. People networking, laughing, making deals. "Take care of yourself," I said finally, turning to leave. "Alexis." I paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "Grandfather would have been proud of you. How you handled everything." I looked back at him. Yes, he would have. Then I walked away, back toward my colleagues, back toward the life I'd rebuilt from the wreckage he'd tried to create. It wasn't about forgiveness. Maybe someday we'd get there, maybe not. But it was about closure. About acknowledging that the past had happened, had hurt, and was now behind us. I had work to do. People depending on me. Ships to move and crews to support, and a legacy to honor. Patrick could figure out his own path forward. I hoped he did. Genuinely. But it wasn't my responsibility anymore. 2 years after the takeover, Dad asked me to come by the house. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those rare Pacific Northwest days when the sun actually broke through and everything looked impossibly green and alive. He was waiting on the back deck, 2 glasses of iced tea sweating on the table between empty chairs. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "Of course." We watched a small sailboat drift past, its white sail bright against the blue water. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said. "The whole thing with Patrick. With you." I waited. I handled it wrong. He turned to look at me. I knew Patrick wasn't ready. Knew he was struggling with the pressure, with feeling like he had something to prove. But I thought, I don't know. I thought forcing him to step up would make him rise to the occasion. "It doesn't work that way," I said gently. "No, it doesn't." He took a sip of tea. "I should have supported you more. Publicly. Made it clear that your work mattered, that you weren't just someone keeping the seat warm until Patrick was ready." I appreciated the acknowledgement, even if it came late. "You did what you thought was right. Doesn't mean it was right, though." We sat in silence for a while. "You know what your mother would say?" he asked suddenly. I smiled. That you're both stubborn idiots and she's glad she doesn't have to deal with this mess? He laughed, a real one. Yeah. Probably. He grew serious again. But also that you remind her of her father. Your other grandfather. The one who ran that machine shop in Eugene. I'd heard stories about him. Quiet, competent, never took credit, but everyone knew the shop ran because of him. He didn't need titles, Dad continued. Didn't need recognition. He just did the work and knew his own worth. That's you, Alexis. Always has been. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I'm proud of you, he said. Should have said it more. Should have shown it more. But I am. Always have been. Thanks, Dad. He reached over and squeezed my hand briefly. Your mother would be proud too. We finished our tea watching the water, the conversation drifting to easier topics. Industry gossip, plans for the upcoming quarter, whether the Mariners had any chance of making the playoffs this year. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. We didn't need one. It was just a father and daughter, finally being honest with each other, acknowledging mistakes and moving forward. Sometimes that's enough. By year 3, Pacific Gateway offered me a promotion. VP of West Coast Operations. It would mean overseeing terminals from San Diego to Seattle, managing hundreds of employees, shaping strategy for the entire region. I took a week to think about it. Elena didn't push. She understood the weight of these decisions. I walked the docks every evening that week, watching the operations I'd helped rebuild. Talking to workers, observing processes, feeling the pulse of the place. On the 6th evening, I found myself at Terminal 9, standing where Grandfather's original dock had been. They'd torn it down years ago, replaced it with modern infrastructure. But I still knew exactly where it had stood. Nora found me there. Big decision, huh? Yeah. You're gonna take it. Probably. She smiled. Good. You've earned it. And it's not like you're disappearing. You'll still be around, just with a fancier title. Same work, bigger scale. That's your specialty. We stood together, watching a container ship being secured for the night. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, calling out to each other, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear. You know what I realized? I said. When Patrick fired me, I thought I'd lost everything. My identity, my purpose, my place in the family business. But you hadn't. No. Because those things weren't tied to a title or a desk or a name on a door. They were tied to this. I gestured at the docks. To the work. The people. The knowledge that what we do matters. Nora nodded. That's why people follow you, you know. Not because you have authority. Because you understand what actually matters. I accepted the promotion the next day. 5 years after Patrick fired me, Harborstone Freight was a memory. The name still existed on some old legal documents and historical records, but the company itself had been fully absorbed into Pacific Gateway. The transition had been so smooth that most people forgot there'd ever been a distinction. I was standing in my new office, which wasn't really that much fancier than the old one, when Catherine Wells stopped by. She'd retired from the board but still consulted occasionally. Wanted to see how you'd settled in, she said, glancing around at the organized chaos of my workspace. Charts, schedules, photographs of various terminals, a shelf of operational manuals I still referenced regularly. Still looks like a working office, not an executive suite, I said. Good. That means you haven't lost your way. She sat down. I also wanted to tell you something. Your grandfather and I had a conversation once, must have been 20 years ago. He said the business would only survive if someone understood it wasn't about moving cargo. It was about taking care of people who moved cargo. Sounds like him. He said you were the only one who really got that. You were maybe 19 at the time, working a summer job on the docks. He watched you interact with the crew, saw how they responded to you, and told me you'd be the one to carry it forward. I hadn't known that. Dad never mentioned it. He made me promise something, Catherine continued. If things ever went sideways, if the company started losing its way, I was supposed to make sure you had a path back. That we didn't lose what made Harborstone matter. Is that why you supported me in the board meeting? She smiled. I supported you because you were right. But yes, I'd been waiting for an opportunity to honor that promise. Your grandfather knew what he was talking about. After she left, I sat for a long time looking at his photograph on my shelf. He'd known. All those years ago, he'd seen something in me that I hadn't even recognized in myself yet. The weight of that trust settled over me, heavy but not burdensome.